Hey everybody, this is Maureen. I am joining you from my living room today, where it is a beautifully snowy Saturday. We're supposed to get several inches worth of snow, so I'm keeping an eye out on the driveway in case I need to shovel. Watching one of my favorite shows called Expedition Unknown on the Discovery Channel. So what I'm doing is working on a Renaissance gown in a couple different parts. I have the bodice, I have 2 sleeves, and this is 4 yards of fabric for the skirt. So this is upholstery fabric. The reason I'm using upholstery fabric is I'm trying to have something that has a thick hand that's going to drape very nicely. Now the skirt's going to be unlined in this case because it's already thick enough as is. So this is what I'm doing to start creating pleats. And I'm going to attach it to a bit of elastic. Now I don't normally use elastic for my waistbands, but I found this very thick, heavy elastic at Michael's, and I'm just using it as a waistband. I'm not going to use it for stretchy purposes. But this will at least give me some foundation to sew the pleats into the backside eventually. So I have trim, a wider trim. This copper trim here I actually bought from my first job at AC Moore 20 plus years ago, so early 2000s. And the blue I just purchased recently at Michael's as well. Now, it is a blue velvet, but it's not your typical blue velvet ribbon. It ends up more so, because I can show you the back of it here. It's not your typical fabric kind of velvet ribbon. It's almost more like it's flocked than it is velvet. But it does the job. It makes it look like what it's supposed to be. And I just saw the UPS guy rolling up with chains on his truck, so that people are ready for a snowstorm here, that's for sure. Typically, we don't see that. I think he's delivering to a neighbor. I don't think it's for me. At least not that I'm aware of. But anyway, so these are the sleeves. Now, the sleeves and the bodice I did line because I do want them a little bit thicker. So this is a nice heavy weight linen. I did bag them out. So I actually did run these on my machine, bagged them out, flipped them inside out, and then hand sewed all the trim. When I started in the SCA 20 years ago, I didn't even know how to hand sew. And I was looking at some of my gowns recently. Trust me, my first gowns were not very good. And going from not knowing how to hand sew, I did some machine sewing, but not really hand sewing. But going from that to where I am now, 20 years later, this just goes to show, stick with it. It's totally worth it. So this is machined on my 100-year-old sewing machine, my Singer 1923 treadle machine. So I use that for the foundational items just because I want to make sure those seams stick together. Hand sewn seams are still very, very strong. We do have a lot of garments that survive, not necessarily from the 16th century, but from later centuries that are all hand sewn. So yet again, using that same kind of trim, combination of some light machine sewing and a lot of hand sewing. The trim you have to do it hand sewn. I tried to do trim on a machine in the past and it just doesn't look good. It even if you have it pinned really well, you pretty much have to hand sew it. It's fiddly. It's what you got to do. So the sleeves are going to be detachable, so I'm going to find a way of putting some hooks and eyes on the arm's eye in that case. And these are based off of a bodice pattern that I had made a few years ago that's very snug. It fits beautifully. I made these just a little bit bigger for the sake of long-term comfort. The other bodice that I had made, I have to wear with my set of stays. I could wear my set of stays underneath these with it maybe not necessarily being completely closed. So I'm trying to create a little bit of variation with my gowns to make sure that I have some flexibility in sizing. I'd rather it being slightly a little bit too big than too small. Now, there are certain ways of, I could add a stomacher, a piece that goes over top the front of this bodice that would hide the laces or hide any of the closures that I do here, and then have some sort of decorative piece in front that could allow me to wear this opened up, and then that other piece would go over top and it would hide the gap. That's what stomachers would do for bodices. They became more popular in the 17th century, having stomachers as part of a regular bit. Tudor times, they were around, you just didn't see them as often, and they became more popular in the Elizabethan clothing time frame. For me, I'm trying to make gowns that are more around like 1550, beginning of the Elizabethan age to a certain extent. So I have to decide yet if I'm going to put any kind of frills or trim around the outside of the sleeves, like a little puff or something, and then this can hook up underneath that puff. So that is still a decorative area that I haven't quite figured out yet, but I definitely have the base done, and I'm working on the skirt today. So kitties received cat beds and fishes on strings for Christmas, so they are thoroughly enjoying those. The damask fabric that this is, basically you have a dark blue with copper leaves is one side, or you have a copper background with blue leaves, this is what I'm using for the outer part of the fabric. I'm not lining the skirt. This is already 4 yards of fabric. It's plenty. So I don't want to make this heavier when I'm attaching it to the bodice, because I'm going to have to sew it on the inside of this heavier lining is what my goal is. But anyway, so that's one of the current projects. I have a couple other bodices that are made with this same pattern. One that's sort of a sage green with some wide velvet trim, which was some Christmas ribbon from Michael's. And then I also have I have a brown velvet that I can show you in a later video that also is sort of in the similar situation. I have sleeves, I have the bodice, and the bodice and skirt are attached together. So it's a little further along than this particular item. And I have to figure out if I'm doing the same thing with the arm's eye, if I'm going to put some, like a puffy panned piece up around the top of the arm's eye to see if I'm going to have that where I can attach the sleeves underneath. So that's where that gown currently is in, and it still needs closures. This will need closures. So I'm slowly working on these newish ones, and it's actually been really good to get back into sewing clothing for myself, because I've been doing dolls for such quite a long time. And the fashion dolls actually have been fantastic in keeping me practiced up on my sewing skills. So I can't complain on that. When I am sewing the skirt, I try to use a heavyweight thread. Like, this is the kind of thread that they use on jeans. It's a heavyweight cotton thread. You can even use like a nylon. I tend to try to use natural materials if I can, but sometimes you work with what you have. So if I need a heavier weight to pleat this, and then get it sewn into a waistband, then I do what I gotta do. But that's some of my sewing, and I have more to do, so there will be more videos about getting some dresses completed. Oh, here's the back. So I just made a nice V over the back, and that's all sewn down as well. So when this is all put together, and then having like a shelf bit of pleats down here, it's really gonna look, I hope, dramatic, and hoping that when it's complete I can get some pictures in it. We'll see. But yeah, that's what I've been up to on my snowy weekend. There's a bunch of sewing. One nice thing I have to say, when I have like 4 yards of fabric on my lap, I don't need a blanket. I am plenty warm. So that's, but yeah, as far as upholstery fabric that I use for SCA related clothing, I try to find something like this. It almost feels like this is wool, to be honest with you. It has that feel to it. Now, the place that I purchase upholstery fabric from doesn't have the amount of material. So they get this as like odd lots or bulk. So they don't necessarily know the fabric content as far as this goes. But this one really feels like it has some wool in it, especially when I'm looking at this selvage edge here. Like that definitely feels like there's some wool in there. There is still a little bit of shine, so I would say it's a wool blend in this case. I mean, I love the color. And it has that hand, it has that drapiness that that one needs for the skirts, especially to get, you know, as you're folding it and pleating it, you want it to stand under its own weight, and this is a thickness enough that it could definitely do that. Just even kind of folding it here, you can kind of see where it's got a little bit of bounce to it, which is important. If you like historical sewing, if you like fashion dolls and other Tudor Renaissance topics, you have found your channel. Please consider liking this video and subscribing. I do upload once monthly, and we make some awesome things over here. And I will see you all in next month's video. Take care. Bye for now.